Welcome, everyone, to our Santa Barbara Response Network, Compassion Center Live. The Santa Barbara Response Network is a grassroots volunteer organization that offers psychological first aid to anyone in our community that is experiencing any form of trauma. In the chat on Facebook, you can call us 24/7, English and Spanish, but it's 805-699-5608, 699-5608, and our website, sbresponsenetwork.org. In over 12 years, we've responded to numerous events in our community, and I'm Gina Carvalho, the Executive Director of the Santa Barbara Response Network. So I welcome you today. And I'm really pleased to have my friend, colleague, and community. What would I call you?
David?
Reverend David. David. David Moore here today to talk to me. I invited him because I like to have the conversations on topics and issues that are on my mind, and I feel like maybe in the hearts of many other people in the community. For the people that don't know Reverend Moore, I would say that he is an activist, a reverend, yes, but I think that I consider you an activist and a person that is fighting for the rights of people in our community and on a broad level. I noticed you got your degree, your doctorate from St. Stephen's University in New Brunswick, Canada.
That's where I got my master's.
Oh, your master's.
Yeah.
And I'm from Canada.
Oh, okay.
I'm a Canadian. I'm a Portuguese Canadian.
Where from where?
Oh, yeah, your doctorate at the University of South Africa. Yeah. And you lead the New Covenant Church that does worship on Sundays at 9 a.m. So anyone can join. And I'm really honored that you're here today. You've been a friend to SBRN for many years, so thank you.
And thank you for your contribution to the community. It's always good for me to have you in my back pocket, so to speak, to become aware of what's going on and, just knowing that you're present in the community to provide a very essential service that I think probably doesn't get enough attention. As far as the depth of the need, but it's a very real need. So thank you.
Thank you, David. I feel like because we're a volunteer group, person to person, we can offer such valuable support to anyone, free, no charge. We're just here to help you get through the experience that you're going through, and we are here for the community. So thank you for that. I saw that when you got your PhD from South Africa today, 31 years ago, was the day that Nelson Mandela was released from prison. And it made me reflect on how far we've come or how far we have not come on in this struggle for justice and freedom for all on this planet. So I was reflecting on that and having this conversation. It is Black History Month. It's an odd thing that we need to have a Black History Month, but we do have a Black History Month. And I wanted to just hear your reflections really from your experience as a Black American, a Black male in America, and a man of faith. What you would say to us, what's your experience in this contemporary life that we're living? What are you experiencing? What would you like to share with us?
Well, one of the phrases you just used was a man of faith. And in some way, we are pretty much all people of faith. maybe I could say faiths, but that's a little bit more formal than I'm going for. So I think we are all people of faith, and I try to live in community, walk in the community, as a reminder of who we are, the, our essential selves as community, but particularly as persons in our families, persons in our environment, to affirm that, to and so to be considered a man of faith, a person of faith, simply means I am one of everybody else, but I've taken my share of the responsibility to to help people basically live out their own faith, if you will.
Hmm. Yeah, that's well said. Walking the walk, right, with us all together.
Yeah.
I'm also been thinking, because I work in the field of mental health and I'm dealing with trauma, mental health issues both here, and I work at the Glendon Association in Psych Alive, where we do a lot of work in suicide prevention, mental health issues. And so I was reflecting also on the mental health experience of the Black community, which is weighty these days. Um, would you have anything you would share about what you're seeing or experiencing in the Black community as far as mental health needs?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's almost hard to think of it in terms of the Black community, maybe the Black communities, because
Yeah.
there's not a lot of unanimity in terms of response to needs, and it just so happens that this is a product of your orientation to life, your culture, and so perhaps you could say there are Black people who like jazz and some R&B, some like rock, and some like hip hop, and all these different expressions. They often overlap, but not always. And it just so happens that there is perhaps a genre that doesn't cross over as much. And this is not completely accurate or definitive, but let's say it were country western music. Now, I would say there are fewer Black people who might be into that. That's not a judgment on the music so much as an approach to life, a worldview, an orientation. And so there are many of us who have come up in the world without access culturally to mental health care. And when I say that, I don't mean just that we couldn't afford it or didn't, I mean, that is a factor. But if it's not part of your culture for a number of reasons, for example, maybe some middle class Black families don't have this in their culture because in the era of their upbringing, there was no access in terms, I mean, because of segregation. They were separated from the resources. As a child, our family was directed from a hospital to a Black funeral home for emergency care after a car crash, because in Arkansas at that time, the field medicine was segregated, hospitals were segregated. So culturally speaking, many of us were not exposed to it. Some gained more exposure to it because of the outstanding efforts of people in media, people who have elevated platforms, like Taraji P. Henson and others. Ron Artest, after the Lakers won the championship that year, he was interviewed while still on the court. And the first thing he said is, "I'd like to thank my therapist." Coming from a Black man, that was revolutionary at the time. Because again, there is, a segment of the population who know the benefits of mental health care, but it's a smaller segment than it needs to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought one of the most groundbreaking interviews I read in the last year and saw was the one within the New York Times. And you know how your names go like, okay. The rapper that's married to Beyonce.
Yeah, Jay-Z.
So Jay-Z. So Jay-Z did this amazing interview about mental health and his experience with therapy. Have you read that?
No.
It's worth reading. He explained what it meant to him as a Black man to grow up as he did, what you were describing, and realizing how he had to learn to reflect, not just but to reflect on what he was doing with his kids, and that how he was treated as a kid, and how that all was starting to make sense and unravel, how he treated women and how he saw women being treated. And so he was very open, and it really, he made such a strong plea for people to go into to investigate their experience. We call it therapy, but my therapy is an exploration into understanding myself and my childhood as an immigrant, so when you were talking about your experience in segregation, I was like, wow, that's powerful to think where you grew up and where you are now, and that
Well, it was mostly where my parents grew up because they did not want their kids to grow up in that environment. We were actually traveling at that time, but their parents lived in North Carolina, which was, part of the Jim Crow experience. And so Dad said, no, we're going to go somewhere else. So you've probably heard the term Great Migration.
Yeah.
We're 6.1 million approximately African Americans left the South between 1970 and 1970. And so they didn't know they were part of that. They just knew they didn't want to live with the terror, with their lives in danger every day, and then having to condition their children to live with that.
Yeah, I was similar. My parents immigrated from Portugal, and I was a child. I immigrated when I was already 5 or 6, but they didn't want that life for me, a new life.
Right.
And that brings with it.
So I have to tell you, Gina, that I often tell people that I personally deeply relate to the children of immigrants and refugees because I am one. Mm-hmm. It's just that it's the same country.
Yeah. Yeah. And, this year, David, reflecting on this year with Black Lives Matter, everything that's gone on. And, I was so pleased with the Nobel Peace Prize, I think, being that Black Lives Matter nominated for the Peace Prize.
Right.
And all of that, that unearthing that's happening. How do you feel? How does that leave you feeling, reflecting on the Black Lives Matter movement?
Well, it's encouraging to see people becoming more conscious. And I think that there was an elevation of not just national, but global consciousness. Mm. And indigenous people and people of colonized people, colonized people around the world took note of that. And so, especially places where persecution is particularly severe. Palestinians really got on board with Black Lives Matter this past year because there is a resonance there. But it wasn't just there. Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar and Bangladesh, same thing. So people who have been colonized or oppressed are relating to this experience.
Yeah, it's global. It's definitely a global movement. It's not an American movement. It's a global, exactly, so well articulated, colonized. And, as a Portuguese, I have always been very ashamed. I mean, we brought over the first slaves, I think, to the West. And when I learned that, I was like, what? I felt like this cultural shame. I was just like deep within me. I was like, oh my God. And then my country was a colonizing nation. So in Africa, Mozambique, Angola, Goa, all these countries that we had colonized, and then brutal wars to keep that colonizing power. I mean, just like we're talking about, it was just so horrific to me when I started to understand what was going on. And I, would feel almost a sense of shame over that domination. So as a child, I was wrestling with that. And I think that's where my feeling for justice, it's like, oh, you look back at your own childhood and realize, how did I become this? What shaped me? And that was a huge, huge shaping of me and my understanding of the world, and where we came from.
You just expressed, I think, a vital principle for living fully, and that is wherever we recognize shame in our lives, to convert it to justice, to extending, reaching out for justice.
Yeah,
And at our best, when we are fully human, we are being true, we are being just. We can't live in alternate realities and false and mythical ways of living.
yeah,
And that's what our hearts cry out for. Our hearts cry out for this more than our bodies need food and water. We need a reason to exist, and that reason for existence is mitigated when we step outside of our full humanity. So we've got to occupy who we are before we can talk about occupying anything else, any societies or possessions, material things.
yeah. Oh boy, yeah, right on. Absolutely. And trauma, in the investigating of my own shame and my own trauma, I think about racial trauma, immigrant trauma. But in this last few years, where media has been just showing such horrific images um, of people being oppressed in many ways, this traumatizes us as a nation and as a people. So when I was in Los Angeles, I did a lot of work in Watts, and I was working with communities there. And they said, we all have PTSD. This was 25 years ago. We're all suffering from PTSD. We're all traumatized,
Yeah.
Seeing this over and over again. So I'm wondering if you've been reflecting on racial trauma as as we're experiencing it, and what we can do, or what you're doing as a person to deal with it, because I'm sure you're impacted.
Yeah, Gina, I think it's just as imperative for people from colonizer cultures to have some kind of treatment, because
Yeah.
uh, I have a friend, a colleague in Minneapolis. He's a Korean American pastor, Jin S. Kim, and he often observes how, as a pastor, he directs people to professional care who are white more than the brown folks and the black folks in his congregation, because there is so much rage that has not been dealt with, has not been encountered. There's so much entitlement, and he likes to say the tortured need care, but the torturer is traumatized too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when we were doing a lot of work and research in suicide and violence through Glendon, we had the opportunity to go into prisons, maximum security prisons, jails, a lot of jails in the Bay Area, and maximum security prisons. And we interviewed murderers, rapists, people who had committed these crimes, and we sat there and we asked them to tell us their story. How is it that you ended up here? And fascinating. I mean, not just fascinating, eye-opening, and my heart just kept opening, because we label, those folks, the bad folks, and they've done all these things. But the truth is, they were oppressed, they were traumatized, they ended up where they were. It doesn't justify the action, but we have to understand as a culture and as a people end up in these situations for a reason. And you're absolutely right. Then when we started to work with the perpetrators and having them come in and speak with the victims and having those conversations like in South Africa, but where we have those restorative justice conversations, that's where the healing starts, right?
Yes.
Right? I
Oh
mean,
yeah, I'm with you on that.
it's not going to happen any other way. I mean, but we're very quick to try to fix it and not take the time for the healing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
and
we need truth and reconciliation as a society.
we do.
Um, one of the things that makes us so influential is not just our capital, but our military. And anybody who looks at themselves as an individual and defines themselves by their power and their wealth is experiencing a deficit of soulness. There's just no soul, or a deprived, debilitated soul in that individual. And so it is with a society that defines itself by its wealth and its power. And so we're experiencing this in two ways. And as individuals, we mirror the society in which we live. And so each of us needs to do what we can to, as individuals and living in smaller subgroups and communities, to live out as much as we can, live out our humanity and model it for people around us, because love wins over it wins over hate. And so, but we have to practice it, and continue. I don't want to, should everybody, but let's stay on track. Let's be encouraged to live out our humanity, even when it seems like we should go to plan B. Plan A is always live out who you are.
Yeah. And love. Yeah. Compassion.
Yeah.
And that's, it's so beautiful what you just said. Reflect on that. We have so many images all the time, and we're bombarded by the hate. And so we have to really dig within us and, like you said, act in the way that is our meaning, our soul, because that's how we can keep that, if there is any balance. But yeah. I want to ask you, because you're such a thoughtful person, and I'm trying to make sense of this. So we're, as a nation, American, this idea of being so polarized.
Yeah.
Do you think we are so polarized, or is that like a whole? I don't know if I've read a lot of stuff.
There is some legitimacy. There is something to that. However, one of the most inspiring things that I experienced recently was watching the trial of President Trump on television, because the prosecutors are Jewish, white, black, brown, and Asian. How about that? I mean, you can say that we're divided, but when you see all of those groups come together and they represent even more groups, we are actually more united than we're allowing ourselves to believe.
Yeah. That's what I'm wondering. Like, sometimes the message gets put out in the media, and I'm not saying there isn't white supremacy and racism in this country. There is, obviously. But I feel like we're fed. I just, that's why I wanted to ask you. I'm not sure, but I wonder what sells and what we're told and how much it gets. But it's a slippery slope. You wouldn't want to say that. I mean, really, of course there is.
not just Pope Francis, but Pope Benedict and Pope John Paul before him would say, it's a culture of death. And, when I hear them from their worldviews talk about a culture of death, I think about our entertainment. I mean, you can if you want to go, on network TV or Netflix or, HBO Max or whatever your sources are, and you're trying to find something entertaining, um, it's almost like it can't be entertaining unless somebody dies. I mean, I'm not saying that doesn't happen in every program, every series, or every episode, but that we are very heavy on things that are heavy,
Yeah.
and that's representative of a culture of death. And because we are a culture of death, we have allowed ourselves to be conditioned into with an appetite for things that are death. That's why the media rushed to every rally that Trump held in the run up to his campaign and throughout, for the most part, throughout his presidency, because it is a culture of death that calls the cameras to them, and it overlooks the culture of life, which is the most wonderful thing that we could promote. And we've been asking, Gina, we've been asking that our whole lives. How come when we turn on the news, it has to be bad news? For me as a kid, it was the Vietnam War, among other things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right, absolutely. So we got some good news and we have some good media, but we need to have the conversations because we just have to turn it off too. We just don't want to go there because our energy, where do we want to put our energy? And I love,
And it's a credit to all of the wonderful journalists who go out there and capture the bad news. But I just kind of wonder if there's some kind of snowball effect where you just keep going for more bad news. And what if you could pull up off of some of it, and just feature more goodness in the world? There's a lot of goodness in the world.
there is. We're experiencing it right now.
Hey,
There's a lot of goodness in the world, and there's a lot of people that care. A lot of people, and that's what we want to highlight. And
that's what Santa Barbara. That's what you're doing is
yeah,
about. And
yeah,
we have a lot of such enterprises in our community.
absolutely. And that's why I like to talk to you and other people in our community that to give us hope and know that there's a lot of love and a lot of care in our community. We have an extraordinarily caring community, but it's not just Santa Barbara, but I want to highlight that because that's what gives my life meaning. So we're
And of course, we keep in mind that being good and being kind includes fighting for the little guy, if you will,
yeah,
little gal.
yeah, yeah. I watched an interesting documentary last night. It's called Ethel, and it's about Ethel Kennedy. It was made by her daughter Rory, who was born 6 months after Robert Kennedy was killed. So she never met her father. So her experience was of her mother. So this was a very interesting documentary about Ethel Kennedy and raising 11 children. But you got to see the human Robert Kennedy. There are all the shots of him with his kids. And the interesting thing, what reminded me of this, is that he brought his kids everywhere. He brought his kids to the McCarthy hearings. He said, you got to see this. You got to understand what's happening. And the kids grew up with a sense of, oh, we got to help people. And he would take them with him on all his campaigns, all through the South. And they experienced firsthand what it was like for not just their father, but for, he said, you've got to learn to give and to share and to, it's a beautiful story. And Ethel is a very self-effacing person, but I think it's worth watching. It's very interesting. This woman is extraordinarily strong woman.
I can believe it. You made me think of when my children were young. As a pastor, well, as a dad, first of all, they wanted to know where I was going and if they could go. Well, I would take them a lot of places, including funerals and memorial services. And so we should not be shocked. Nobody should be shocked that my kids are real empaths. They're intuitive empaths, far beyond the stage that I was at their age, because I basically learned how to live within an enclosure, protecting emotion, and so it took me years to come to that place, and so they came up in life that way. So yeah, they are very caring people.
Yeah. So you have 5 children, right?
Yes,
5 adult children.
5 adult children.
Wow. Are they in Santa Barbara and are they?
I have two here in town. I have a son that lives in North Hollywood, a son that lives in L.A., and a daughter who lives in Wisconsin.
No. Have they followed your path of service?
They're they're they serve according to their
Yes.
gifts. They have different, I like, for instance, my son Matt, who lives here in Santa Barbara. Every Thanksgiving, of course, he couldn't do it this year. He wasn't equipped to do it, but every Thanksgiving he would go out to Pershing Park and have a team of people prepare about 150 meals, and and give them out to people. And so, I mean, that's his heart, and I celebrate that. And then, I have another son who's a professional musician. He puts his heart into it, but you would not necessarily call it a service oriented kind of thing. But that's where his heart is. And when he does work, even when he works for pay, he does it, as with a servant's heart.
Yeah. And the art is a service. My goodness.
Yes, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The service. And talk about Pershing Park. We're going to be working, I think, there, Santa Barbara Response Network, working with SB Act and other to offer compassionate psychological care there. So we want to work a lot more. There's more homeless, more need for people who are displaced, and it's a growing number in our community. So we're hoping to offer our services there too. So
That is fantastic.
I'm really happy with it. Yeah, I have a conversation next week to see how we can work all that out and
Yeah. I
just
should tell you that my daughter, uh, she became a nurse.
mm,
That after she was a year away from her BA at Brooks Institute that I was paying for, and she pulled out because that wasn't a thing for her. But I'm also grateful for her prescience, because that school collapsed, and then the whole field is in limbo, because everybody can do their own photography nowadays. I mean,
mm,
so she got out, and it was expensive, but the fact that she went from that to nursing says a lot.
absolutely. Yeah, I was just speaking with some nurses today at working at the hospital. It's like, I tell you, I'm so grateful and give so much, I have so much respect and care for our first responders and nurses.
Yeah.
Well, as we come to the end of our conversation, half an hour, um, thank you for being here. I always love talking to you. And I want to ask, I just anything you want to share before we close for the evening.
Yeah, I will quote a scripture.
Mhm.
uh, Lamentations, the third chapter, 23rd verse says, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases, and his mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. And for me, that's a testament to what we see in nature. There's something about nature that renews us. It's new every morning, no matter what state it is in, what season it is. There's something new that speaks about eternality, permanence. The mountains the hills that are nearby, they pre-exist us, and they'll be there when we're gone. The ocean, and in the birds we hear, and the trees and shrubs and flowers and everything around us, the fresh air after the rain, all of these things renew us. And so I would urge everybody to allow yourself to be renewed.
I do. I agree. Nature is healing and it's there for us everywhere. Thank you, David.
Well,
Thank you.
thanks for the invite.
Yeah, we'll talk again.
Okay.
Take
Bye,
care.
Gina.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Amanda.